Blue lights flashed behind Diane Whitmore's rental car as she pulled over to a rural road in Tennessee. Little did she know that a simple trip to pick up her niece's graduation gown would end with a decorated lieutenant general handcuffed and humiliated by two police officers who saw only another black woman to put in her place. But Sergeant Kyle Brennan and Deputy Travis Holden had no idea of the mistake they were making. Because the woman they jokingly and sarcastically called General Fatima had earned those stars in 27 years of service, commanding peacekeeping missions and rescue operations in territories they would never dare to set foot in. When she pressed the emergency button on her smartwatch, she didn't just alert the Department of Defense. She set in motion a chain reaction that would dismantle a corruption network stretching from rural patrol cars to congressional offices, proving that some of the most important battles for democracy aren't fought in distant war zones, but on the dirt roads of one's own country. Before we continue this story, please comment on which city or country you are watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. This is just the first twist in a story that will surprise you. The Tennessee sun was setting low on the horizon when Diane Whitmore parked her rental car in front of the old house where she had grown up, in quiet Clearwater Springs. The engine still vibrated softly as she stood motionless for a few seconds, observing the porch that had so often served as a refuge for dreams, scoldings, and farewells. 27 years in the armed forces had taken her through deserts, borders, and international missions. But it was there, on that patch of red earth with the smell of damp soil, that everything always made sense again. She stepped out of the car. Her simple jeans and white blouse contrasted sharply with the impeccable medal-laden uniforms that had marked her career. At 52, Diane had the bearing of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Her short, natural hair, tinged with grey, caught the last golden glow of the sunset as she grabbed her backpack from the trunk. Suddenly, the front door flung open. Janet, her sister, came running down the porch steps, arms outstretched, her smile wet with longing. The hug was firm, lingering like those who understand each other without needing to speak. "Look at you," Janet said, walking away with tears in her eyes. "Still trying to save the world, are you?" "One mission at a time," Diane replied, with a calm smile that softened the soldier's stern expression. A cheerful noise came from the living room. Hurried footsteps, an excited voice. 17-year-old Amber appeared in the doorway, trying to look cool, but unable to hide the sparkle in her eyes. "Auntie Di!" Diane's military rigidity vanished in an instant when her niece threw herself into her arms. "There's my future college student, ready for graduation tomorrow." "More ready now that you're here," Amber replied, her voice muffled against her aunt's shoulder. They went inside. The smell of Janet's cornbread filled the house. Everything remained the same, the family photos on the walls, her mother's quilts covering the sofas, the old piano in the corner where Diane used to spend hours rehearsing as a girl. "I can't believe my little sister became a general," Janet said, laughing proudly. "Mum would be so happy." "And also complaining about the mud I brought in on my shoes," Diane replied, laughing in a rare way, a sound her subordinates had never heard before. The conversation stretched late into the night. Family stories, childhood memories, Amber's plans for college, Janet's work in elementary school. Diane listened more than she spoke. In that home, she wasn't General Whitmore. She was just Di, the girl who climbed the oak tree in the backyard and came back all scratched up. It was Amber who broke the tranquility with a desperate groan. "Auntie, I forgot to pick up my graduation gown and cap. The store closes early tomorrow." "Calm down, leave it to me," said Diane, already getting up. "It's at the Clearwater Formal Wear store on Magnolia Street, right? But Aunt, you don't need to go now. Imagine, I can't let my niece graduate without the right outfit." She grabbed her keys, kissed her sister and left. The town seemed smaller, but her heart filled with nostalgia as she passed the school where she had studied, the church where she had been baptized, and the grocery store where she had spent her allowance. Clearwater Springs had grown. It had new pharmacies, modern bakeries, but the same air of simplicity remained. At the store, she was greeted by Mrs. Patterson, who recognized her immediately. "Well, if it isn't Diane, her mother would be so proud." The phrase sounded familiar, the same words Janet had said earlier. Diane smiled, paid the rent for the clothes, and thanked her. As she left, night had already fallen. The road was a silvery streak between fields and little houses with lights on. The sound of crickets and the warm wind brought peace. It was the Tennessee she loved, serene, beautiful, timeless. 10 minutes later, the rearview mirror reflected flashing blue lights. A patrol car followed closely, maintaining a safe but steady distance. Diane glanced at the speedometer. Everything was within the limit. Her military instincts kicked in. The car remained there, glued to the road. After 2 kilometers, her chest tightened. She knew. I'd felt that before, the feeling that sometimes the uniform doesn't protect you. The feeling of being watched and judged persisted. It never got any easier. The blue lights cut through the calm of the Tennessee night like a blade. Diane Whitmore's heart sank, but her face remained steady. She pulled the car over to the side of the road, turned on her hazard lights, kept the headlights on, and rolled down the window. Her hands went straight to the steering wheel, visible, motionless. 2 police officers approached, their flashlights streaking beams of light in the darkness. The older one, white, with broad shoulders and an arrogant look, stepped forward. Sergeant Kyle Brennan. The other, Deputy Travis Holden, younger and hesitant, stayed a few steps behind. "Ma'am, I need you to get out of the vehicle," Kyle ordered in a dry, authoritative tone. Diane kept her voice calm. "May I know the reason for the approach, sir?" "I told you to get out of the car, ma'am." His hand rested on the gun in a gesture that said more than any answer could say. "Sir, there was no infraction. I was within the speed limit." Deputy Holden tried to intervene, his voice choked with emotion. "We received a report of a stolen vehicle matching that description. Silver sedan, black woman at the wheel." Diane took a deep breath. The same old story. "Officers, this car is rented. I have the documents with me. Can I get them from my bag?" "Very slowly," Kyle replied, shining the flashlight on her face. "And keep your hands where I can see them." Diane calmly opened her bag, took out her military ID, driver's license, and rental agreement. She handed everything out the window. The sergeant barely glanced at it before tossing it to his partner. "It says here that she's a general," Holden murmured. "Ah, sure," the sergeant scoffed. "General now, get out of the car, General." Diane maintained a steady gaze. "I am Lieutenant General Diane Whitmore of the United States Armed Forces. These documents confirm my identity." Kyle's laughter echoed down the road. "Did you hear that, Holden? General Fatima here thinks it's important." She left slowly, posture erect, dignity intact. "Officers, there's been a mistake. Verify my credentials." "Turn around, hands behind your back. That's unnecessary," she insisted, but obeyed. The handcuffs snapped shut with a cold crack. "I request immediate contact with my superior at the Department of Defense." "Calm down, General Fatima. We'll settle this at the police station," the sergeant mocked, laughing. On the other side of the road, hidden among the trees, Marcus Green, a young black man returning from his job at the gas station, watched the scene. Fear and indignation mingled. He picked up his cell phone and started recording, his hands trembling. He knew what he was seeing, a black woman being humiliated, and he knew how these stories usually ended. "Hey!" shouted the sergeant, noticing the light from the screen. "Kid, what do you think you're doing?" "I'm just going home, sir." "Come here now." Marcus approached, his heart racing. "I didn't do anything." The sergeant snatched the cell phone from his hand. "Are you filming us?" I have that right. The sound of the cell phone shattering on the asphalt cut through the silence. Kyle stomped on it forcefully, smiling. Oops. Accident. It happens. Get out of here, kid, before you have one too. Marcus looked at Diane, who stared intently at him, a look that said without words, "Remember this." He nodded, swallowed his fear, and disappeared into the darkness. As they placed her in the back seat of the vehicle, Diane discreetly pressed the emergency button on her military smartwatch. The encrypted signal went directly to the Department of Defense, triggering a top priority protocol, reserved only for the highest-ranking officers in danger. The drive to the police station was silent, broken only by the noise of the police radio. Diane looked out the window, watching the streets of Clearwater Springs pass by like ghosts, the same place where she had learned the value of discipline and now was experiencing the harshest face of injustice. The irony of fate wounded her deeply. She had served her country in war zones, represented the flag in hostile territories, and now she was being treated as an enemy on her own soil. At the Department of Defense, the alert echoed within seconds. Colonel Rebecca Hastings, on duty at the communications center, stared at the monitor in disbelief. The code was flashing red. A simple, direct message, impossible to ignore. Alphabet Green Protocol, high-ranking officer under wrongful detention. The signal indicated code black, a high-ranking officer in imminent danger. At the Department of Defense Communications Center, Colonel Rebecca Hastings answered the alert and immediately contacted General Richard Caldwell, commander of Eaglestone Air Force Base, who was reviewing intelligence reports in his office. "Sir, we received a black code from Lieutenant General Diane Whitmore," he informed him, his voice firm but tense. The general looked up, alarmed. "Diane Whitmore? Where is the signal coming from?" "From rural Tennessee, sir. From a small town called Clearwater Springs. The signal was interrupted after the initial activation." "Call Major Ethan Cross," Caldwell ordered, already standing, "and prepare the plane. If General Whitmore is in danger, we will respond with everything we have." Major Ethan Cross was reviewing field reports when his phone vibrated. The message was short and direct. "Eaglestone Wing. Immediate meeting." His heart raced. He owed his life to that woman. He had served under Diane Whitmore in an operation in Kentucky, when she rescued him from a burning armored vehicle during an ambush. If she needed help now, he would move the entire country if necessary. Meanwhile, at the Clearwater Springs police station, Diane was being processed under the cold, sarcastic gaze of someone who wanted to make her seem small. Sergeant Lisa Grant, on duty, barely looked up while Sergeant Kyle Brennan filled out the paperwork. "What's the accusation?" she asked, bored. "Suspected vehicle theft, resisting arrest and contempt of court," Kyle replied quickly, as if he had already rehearsed the lie. Diane remained silent while they took her fingerprints and a photo of her face. Comments echoed through the room. "Look, if you think you're important just because you wear a uniform. She must think she's some kind of executive from Washington." Muffled laughter, open disrespect. They placed her in a damp cell, the air reeking of bleach and despair. An old radio played a melancholic blues, an ironic soundtrack to the humiliation. Diane sat on the narrow bench and closed her eyes, activating the same mental focus she used on the field. She knew who she was. She served her country for 27 years, led complex missions, commanded soldiers, and earned the respect of presidents and nations. No small-town prejudice could take that away from her. He looked at his watch and murmured, "They're coming." Miles away, General Caldwell boarded the military jet, his face rigid. "No one, absolutely no one, treats one of our officers that way." The flight to Tennessee would take just over an hour, but every minute felt like a test of patience. As the aircraft cut through the clouds, Ethan Cross vividly recalled the day he met Diane Whitmore. It was a sweltering October morning in 2018 in the hills of Kentucky. A rescue operation had gone wrong. An insurgent militia had ambushed the convoy, blowing up one of the vehicles. On the radio, her voice echoed calmly and precisely. "This is Eagle 6. We're on our way. Arrival in 20 minutes." The terrain was hostile. Bullets sliced through the air. Amidst the smoke and chaos, Diane found Cross, trapped under the armored vehicle, his leg crushed. "Stay with me, soldier. What's your name?" "Cross, ma'am." "Ethan Cross." "Very well, Major Cross. Today is not your day to die." She personally pulled him out, shielding him with her own body as gunshots whizzed around them. The rescue was a success, and from then on, Ethan carried not only the scar on his leg, but the certainty that he owed his life to that woman. Now, years later, sitting in the Department of Defense's Operations Center, he spoke with General Caldwell via secure video conference. "Sir, there's nothing in the databases, no arrest record, no public information." The general, still in flight, frowned. "Either she hasn't been prosecuted yet, or someone is trying to cover everything up." "I'm tracking communication signals and satellite imagery," Cross replied, typing frantically. "We'll find her, sir." The general looked out the jet window and murmured, "Find it, Major, because if they laid a finger on General Whitmore, this won't end quietly. A small town like Clearwater Springs shouldn't be difficult to map." Major Ethan Cross's fingers glided with precision across the keyboard of the Department of Defense's Operations Center, accessing layers of systems that few in the country even knew existed. "Sir, I've located her rental car," he informed him. "It's parked at the Clearwater Springs police station." "Any update on her condition?" asked General Richard Caldwell impatiently. "No, sir. But the fact that General Whitmore activated the Black Code Protocol tells us everything we need to know." Meanwhile, in Clearwater Springs, something was beginning to stir within the police station itself. Deputy Ashley Morrison, in her first year of service, discreetly observed the comings and goings of her colleagues. She had been on duty when the woman was brought in, and something about it all didn't seem right. He was young, but he had grown up there. He knew how to distinguish between a legitimate approach and pure abuse of authority. From the very first moment, he noticed the prisoner's posture, calm, firm, silent, and when he helped her take her fingerprints, he saw what made her hesitate. Meticulously engraved military tattoos, royal insignia with the emblem of the Special Forces and campaign medals. Shortly after, she heard Sergeant Kyle Brennan calling her from the break room, where he, Deputy Travis Holden, and other officers were laughing loudly. "Hey, Morrison, come here for a minute." Ashley entered reluctantly. "See that woman in the cell over there?" Kyle asked, raising his coffee cup triumphantly. "That's what happens when someone thinks they're better than you." "Sir, her paperwork seemed to be in order, and she cooperated the entire time," Ashley said carefully. Deputy Holden looked away, uncomfortable. "Documentation can be falsified," the sergeant replied disdainfully. "What matters is that today someone learned their place." The conversation kept echoing in the young woman's mind. Hours later, she found an excuse to go back past the cells. There was Diane Whitmore, sitting upright on the cold bench, her eyes serene and unwavering. When their eyes met, Ashley felt her heart clench. I had seen that same expression in my grandfather, a World War II veteran, the look of someone who had faced the worst and still chose to uphold his honor. Whoever that woman was, she was a soldier. Tension was rising. In the capital, Chief of Police Sharon Garrett, who is in charge of the Clearwater Springs Police Department, was receiving incessant calls. "Chief Garrett, this is Deputy Secretary Vincent Hammond from the Governor's office," a firm voice said over the secure line. "We're receiving inquiries about an arrest made by your team tonight. Can you clarify?" "It was a routine stop that escalated due to resistance from the suspect," Sharon replied cautiously, weighing each word. "The woman claims to be a general in the armed forces, but we have no confirmation." "I understand. Keep this confidential," replied the deputy secretary. "We don't need unnecessary noise." What Sharon didn't mention was that she had already received 3 calls from the Department of Defense, all demanding explanations. Something was about to explode. Miles away, in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, Marcus Green stared at the destroyed cell phone that Kyle Brennan had trampled on. His friend Jordan Wells, a technology student, was taking the fragments apart on a makeshift workbench. "Dude, you won't believe this!" Jordan exclaimed excitedly. "I managed to recover the memory card. And guess what? The video was syncing to the cloud." The video started playing on the laptop screen, grainy, shaky, but clearly showing the scene. Diane's voice was calm. The police officers were aggressive, and there was no sign of resistance. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was unmistakable. Marcus stood motionless. This is proof," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm already uploading it to the network," Jordan replied, typing non-stop. "If they try to delete this story, it'll be too late." On the other end of the secure line, at the Department of Defense, Major Cross's eyes were fixed on the screen as the first frames of the video began to arrive through an intercepted channel. He swallowed hard and said, "Sir, we have images. The situation is real." And for the first time that night, General Caldwell answered without hesitation. "Then get everything ready, Major. Clearwater Springs will never be the same again. I'll publish it on every platform I can. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, this woman handcuffed." The video began to spread like wildfire, shared by anonymous profiles and journalists, reposted by activists and outraged citizens. Within a few hours, it had already surpassed thousands of views, and no one yet knew the name of the handcuffed woman who appeared being humiliated at the Clearwater Springs police station. In the Department of Defense, Major Ethan Cross typed non-stop. "Sir, we have a problem. The internal cameras at the police station have been turned off, all of them, not just the ones in the prison." On the other side of the safe line, General Richard Caldwell, already on Tennessee soil after landing at a military base near Nashville, gripped the steering wheel tightly. "That was sabotage, sir," Cross continued. "Someone with technical knowledge wiped the server data in less than 30 minutes. "And what about the police officers involved?" the general asked. "I'm checking his background right now. Sergeant Kyle Brennan has 3 complaints of excessive use of force in the last 5 years, all of which were dismissed. And there's more. He participates in nationalist forums and follows pages that promote racial hate speech." Caldwell's face hardened. The picture became clearer and more revolting. At the Clearwater Springs police station, the atmosphere was one of restrained tension. The end of the shift was approaching, but nobody was relaxing. The calls kept coming in. State and federal authorities, as well as journalists, demanded answers. Police Chief Sharon Garrett showed up in person, which, in itself, already indicated that this was serious business. He called Kyle and Holden aside for a private conversation, then examined the paperwork and announced in a firm voice, "I want everyone to pay close attention. No comments to the press. Any questions will be directed to me only." Deputy Ashley Morrison, watching from afar, felt a knot in her stomach. She was already familiar with that type of warning. It meant that someone had made a big mistake. Around 3 in the morning, the phone in the boss's office rang. It was a discreet call from the Tennessee State Attorney's office. The message was quick and direct. The woman must be released immediately, and without fanfare. Sharon Garrett hung up the phone and stood silently for a few seconds, staring intently at the wall. Then he took a deep breath and went to the cell himself. "Mrs. Whitmore, you are free to go." Diane stood up, her posture still erect despite her fatigue. "Will I be accused of something?" "No charges will be filed at this time." "I understand." "And my belongings." Sharon handed over a plastic bag containing her wallet, keys, and watch. "Everything here is accounted for." Diane checked, looked the chief in the eye and replied, "No excuses then." "The procedures were followed," Sharon said coldly. "You are free to go." As Diane walked down the hallways, she passed the break room. The silence was almost palpable. Some police officers pretended to shuffle through papers. Others avoided looking. Deputy Holden looked up for a moment, then looked down. Sergeant Brennan was nowhere to be found. Outside, the early morning hours were already bustling. Reporters, TV cameras, and protesters crowded the sidewalk. The hashtag Mao Woman Handcuffed had become a national trending topic. Microphones were extended, flashes exploded, voices shouted questions. But Diane simply walked, unhurried and without fear, to the rental car. He got in, started the engine and drove off, ignoring the chaos he left behind. 20 minutes later, he arrived at his sister's house. The lights were on, and Janet and Amber were already running out before the car stopped. "Oh my God, Di, we saw everything," Janet cried. "It was on TV, on social media. Everyone's talking about it. Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Diane hugged her niece tightly, feeling the anger and humiliation transform into something new. Determination. "I'm fine," he replied firmly. "But this was never just about me. It's about what's to come." In the distant sky, the sound of military helicopters echoed, rapidly approaching. And while Clearwater Springs was still trying to understand what was happening, General Caldwell was already 5 minutes away, bringing with him the full weight and power of the United States Armed Forces. The small town that had tried to humiliate a woman was now about to learn what happens when you try to silence the wrong voice. The morning after Diane Whitmore's release, Chief of Police Sharon Garrett stood behind a podium in the auditorium of the Clearwater Springs Municipal Building, her face impassive before a crowd of reporters, flashes and microphones. The press conference had been hastily convened, a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative before digital chaos devoured the entire city. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to clarify the facts of last night," Sharon began, in the cold, rehearsed tone of someone who knows that every word could become a headline. The Clearwater Springs Police Department conducted a routine traffic stop following a report of a stolen vehicle, matching the description of the vehicle in question. All procedures were followed according to protocol. A reporter from Nashville, holding her cell phone in recording mode, raised her hand. "Chief Garrett, the viral video shows a black woman being handcuffed without resisting. Do you consider this to have been abuse or racial discrimination?" Sharon maintained her composure, her gaze stern. "The video only shows part of what happened. The person was released after their identity was verified. We consider the case closed, but there are reports that this person is a general in the armed forces. Is that true?" Sharon took a deep breath. "I cannot comment on identities in ongoing investigations. This department treats all citizens equally, regardless of their declared status." The emphasis on the word "declared" did not go unnoticed. Within minutes, excerpts from the press conference began circulating on social media with indignant captions. Sharon's evasive tone fueled national trending topics. "Macho woman handcuffed." "Justice for Diane." "General Whitmore." The internet reacted with a fury that neither the chief nor the local government imagined they could contain. Hours later, an official black sedan parked in front of Janet Whitmore's house in the city's oldest neighborhood. Deputy Mayor Paul Henderson emerged from inside, adjusting his tie and jacket with the visible discomfort of someone sent to put out a fire with his bare hands. Janet opened the door, looking serious. "Can I help you?" "Ma'am, good morning. I'm Deputy Mayor Henderson. I came to speak with your sister about the unfortunate incident that occurred yesterday." Diane appeared right behind her, with the same sharp serenity she had maintained in the cell. "I am General Whitmore. Tell me what you need." "General, first of all, I want to express the City Hall's regret for what happened. It was a misunderstanding. The city wants to correct this in the best way possible." "How do I fix it?" she asked without blinking. "With a public apology, a guarantee that the police officers will undergo new training, and of course, financial compensation." Diane stared at him for a long time, until the silence became uncomfortable. "So you want me to accept an apology, and some money, and in return disappear quietly? I wouldn't put it in those terms." "Well, I would say," she interrupted firmly, "I've worn this uniform for 27 years. I've represented the United States in territories where being a woman and an officer meant risking death. I didn't fight in wars to be handcuffed in the street where I grew up." Her voice didn't rise, but the weight of her words filled the room. "That's not going to happen, Mr. Henderson." The deputy mayor swallowed hard, mumbled a farewell, and left empty-handed. In the room, Janet and Amber watched her in silence, sensing that something much bigger was about to begin. Later, Diane sat down at her laptop, took a deep breath, and dialed a number that hadn't called in years. "Dr. Malcolm Pierce, civil rights attorney." "Malcolm, it's General Whitmore. I need someone who isn't afraid to stand up to the system. Are you still that person?" On the other side, a long pause. "I've been following your case, General, and I'm warning you, they're going to come at me with everything they've got. This is no longer a police matter. It's political. You've become a symbol, and symbols frighten the powerful." "Then it's time to scare the right people," Diane replied. Malcolm let out a restrained laugh. "We'll meet tomorrow, but be prepared. They'll try to destroy you before you can even speak." Meanwhile, the networks were buzzing. News outlets confirmed the exemplary military record of Diane Whitmore, a former commander of international missions decorated for bravery. Veterans associations, groups of lawyers, and collectives of uniformed women published statements of support. Videos of black soldiers sharing similar stories went viral, multiplying the outrage. But the other side was moving too. Extremist profiles began spreading conspiracy theories, claiming that Diane was a political infiltrator and that the video was a setup against the police. Security forums, ultranationalist blogs, and anonymous columns on social media were spreading misinformation at record speed. And inside the Clearwater Springs police station, the air grew heavy. Suspicious glances, whispered conversations, confiscated cell phones. The city, which until the day before had slept peacefully, now breathed like a powder keg about to explode. And Diane Whitmore, sitting in her sister's living room, knew that the real battle was only just beginning. Deputy Ashley Morrison followed the news reports with a racing heart. With each new headline, her unease grew. After seeing Diane Whitmore's interview being discussed on social media, she decided to do her own research into the military background of the woman her colleagues called the arrogant one. The result left her breathless: international missions, decorations, an exemplary career. That woman was not an offender. She was a hero. During her lunch break, Ashley approached the break room. The laughter caught her attention. "I'm telling you, we got the message across right," boasted Sergeant Kyle Brennan, coffee mug in hand. "These guys in suits think they can walk around here acting like they own the world. Well, they can't." "Kyle, speak more quietly," murmured Deputy Stephanie Rogers, glancing around. "Why? We did our job. These people need to remember that a badge still means power." The words chilled her to the bone. With trembling hands, Ashley turned on the voice recorder on her cell phone and discreetly placed it on the table. In the following minutes, he recorded the sergeant and other police officers making increasingly aggressive comments. It wasn't a misunderstanding, it was an intentional attack. Phrases like, "These people need to be put in their place and no one is above the law," echoed through the room. She turned off the recorder and left, almost breathless. That night at home, she listened to the audio repeatedly, her stomach churning. Next, he wrote a simple and direct email. Subject, "You need to hear this." Recipient, Emma Carson, NBN, Nashville. People need to know what really happened. While Ashley was exposing the corruption within the corporation itself, Major Ethan Cross at the Department of Defense was following a different path. He analyzed reports and network flows with General Richard Caldwell, who observed each new piece of information with a somber look. "Sir, you need to see this," Cross said, projecting the images onto a screen. "Sergeant Kyle Brennan is active on an extremist forum called Patriot Guard 88. "Explain," ordered the general, his voice tense. "Constant posts about setting examples for those who think they are above the law. Discussions about humiliating public figures, persecuting minorities, and restoring moral order." Caldwell leafed through the printed captures, each page more disturbing than the last. "This suggests premeditation." "More than that, sir," Cross replied. He researched General Whitmore's name weeks before her trip to Clearwater Springs. He knew she was coming. The silence that followed was heavy. So it wasn't a botched approach. It was an ambush. "Yes, sir." And he didn't act alone. "I want everything about this group," Caldwell said, clenching his fist. "Accounts, members, funders, every thread in this network." While the department mobilized covert teams to track down Patriot Guard 88, Diane Whitmore prepared for her first major interview. Despite warnings from allies, she knew she needed to speak and that the country needed to hear her. The setting was a discreet studio in Nashville. Journalist James Richardson from the National Broadcasting Network, NBN, began with the question everyone wanted to ask. "General Whitmore, the video of your arrest sparked a national debate. What really happened that night?" Diane maintained a military posture, her gaze fixed on the camera. "This isn't just about me," he began. "It's about a system that allows some to abuse power out of pure prejudice. I swore to protect this country from enemies both external and internal. That oath doesn't end just because I've taken off my uniform. Some critics say that she is using her military rank to seek privileges," Richardson retorted. Diane replied without hesitation, "I didn't ask for privilege. I asked for equality. The same treatment any citizen would deserve when unjustly stopped. If demanding accountability is a privilege, then we have a serious problem, and it's not mine, it's the country's." The interview was broadcast live. Within a few hours, the video surpassed millions of views. Donations to the legal fund organized by Dr. Malcolm Pierce began pouring in from all over the United States. Small amounts, messages of support, and even veterans of the armed forces sending gratuities. But not everyone was celebrating. Conservative media outlets began attacking Diane personally, questioning her background and insinuating that she was part of a political campaign against the police. In forums and radio programs, presenters referred to her as the militant general. Meanwhile, social media was divided between admiration and hatred, justice and fury. But somewhere in the Tennessee mountains, Major Cross stared at the flashing data on the screen and murmured, "They messed with the wrong person, and now the whole country will see what happens when the truth wears a uniform." Death threats began surfacing on social media just days after the interview. Anonymous messages, posts on extremist forums, defamatory fabrications. Teacher Janet Whitmore, Diane's sister, decided to temporarily close the school she ran in the Old Springs neighborhood to reinforce security. The parents were frightened, and the once peaceful city now seemed to breathe fear. That same week, horror arrived at Deputy Ashley Morrison's doorstep. She woke up in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke and the orange glow coming through the curtains. When she opened the window, she froze. A wooden cross, almost 2 meters tall, was burning in the middle of the garden, and racist words covered the garage. The noise of the sirens mingled with the crackling of burning wood as Ryan, his brother, a mechanic who worked the night shift, parked the truck. "Ashley, you need to get out of this city now," she shouted, her voice choked with fear and fury. But she just took a deep breath. "No, Ryan, if I leave, they win, and I won't let them win." Instead of backing down, Ashley called Diane Whitmore directly. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe in a neighboring town, far from the cameras and suspicious eyes of Clearwater Springs. Once they sat down, Ashley slid a brown envelope across the table. "General Whitmore, what happened to you was not a mistake. It was planned." Diane opened the envelope. Inside were transcribed recordings of Sergeant Kyle Brennan's conversations and copies of screenshots from the Patriot Guard 88 network, confidentially sent by Ethan Cross. Diane stared at the young woman. "Deputy Morrison, that took courage. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Ashley nodded, her hands trembling. "My grandfather fought in Vietnam. He used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's deciding to stand up even when you're afraid." Diane smiled slightly. "So we stood up together." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., tension gripped the conference room at the Department of Defense. General Patricia Hayes, the Chief of Staff, was leading a crisis meeting. On the other side of the table, Diane Whitmore sat upright, surrounded by generals and political advisors. "General Whitmore, we need to discuss the implications of your case," Patricia began, her voice held tight. "Some members of Congress are concerned about the military's involvement in civilian affairs. Ma'am, I was arrested while on leave. I didn't seek this conflict, it found me," Diane replied firmly. "Even so, some say her reaction was disproportionate," Patricia retorted. Diane looked up. "Disproportionate? Ma'am, I was handcuffed, humiliated and threatened by police officers who singled me out because of the color of my skin and my position. The evidence shows it was an ambush, not an accident." General Daniel Foster, a veteran of peacekeeping operations and a long-time ally, leaned forward. "Diane, everyone here respects your record, but your stance is creating friction between civilian and military forces. This could have serious political consequences." "Are you asking me to be quiet?" "I'm saying that sometimes the greatest mission requires personal sacrifices." Diane took a deep breath. "With all due respect, gentlemen, I swore to defend the Constitution, and this document guarantees equality before the law. If we, the military, do not uphold this principle when it is challenged, what exactly are we defending?" The room fell silent. When the meeting ended, Diane knew she had crossed an invisible line. His name had just been added to the conduct review list, the bureaucratic way of notifying someone that they had become a nuisance. Hours later, in the office of Secretary of Defense William Bradford, the atmosphere was one of political warfare. Phone calls were coming in from all sides: senators, congressmen, regional commanders, governors. "Mr. Secretary," said the Chief of Staff, rushing in, "we're receiving pressure from Congress. Senator Robert Harrison wants to know why we haven't yet opened disciplinary proceedings against General Whitmore." Bradford sighed, rubbing his temples. "And what about the other side? Progressive lawmakers are calling for an investigation into institutional racism within the Tennessee Police Department." The secretary stood up and looked out the window, where the Potomac River gleamed under the Washington sun. "A small town turned the country into an ideological battleground," he murmured, "and all because of a woman who refused to bow her head." In rural Tennessee, Diane Whitmore knew that the war was now of a different kind. No longer against weapons, but against narratives. And in every screen, headline and speech, she was the symbol of a country that needed to decide if it still believed in its own justice system. Senator Catherine Mills wanted answers. Mr. Secretary, the entire country saw the video. Why isn't the government doing more to protect General Whitmore? On the other end of the line, Secretary of Defense William Bradford took a deep breath before responding. Senator, the White House is maintaining neutrality for now. Neutrality? In the face of a decorated officer being publicly humiliated? The silence was more eloquent than any justification. When he hung up, Bradford walked to his office window, watching the Potomac River glisten in the Washington sun. He knew that politics had its own codes, and that sometimes even the most honorable became expendable pawns. Diane Whitmore was one of the nation's most decorated officers, with 27 years of impeccable service, but now her name was at the center of a storm. Even so, he made the decision that would haunt him in the following months. Schedule a meeting with General Whitmore. I want to hear her side of the story personally. Meanwhile, in Clearwater Springs, Chief of Police Sharon Garrett gathered her trusted officers in the precinct's conference room. The atmosphere was tense. The media attention is overwhelming, she began, facing the group. We need to present a united front. It's not about skin color, it's about respect for police authority and the rule of law. Sergeant Kyle Brennan crossed his arms, puffing out his chest. Exactly, Chief. We did our job. This woman thinks she's untouchable. Deputy Stephanie Rogers raised her hand hesitantly. Chief, some of the recordings that are circulating show some worrying things. Perhaps we should cooperate with internal affairs. Sharon's gaze hardened. Are you questioning your colleagues, Deputy Rogers? No, ma'am. I just think that... Enough, Kyle interrupted. These audios may have been tampered with, and these posts are the work of agitators trying to destroy us. Sharon nodded in approval. Kyle is right. If General Whitmore wants to turn this into a racial issue, that's her choice. Our version is simple. We followed protocol. Deny everything and maintain the narrative. The final message came as a threat, and anyone here thinking of cooperating with outside investigators should remember to whom they owe loyalty. We protect our own. The silence that followed was suffocating. While the chief tried to control the damage, Dr. Malcolm Pierce, in his Nashville office, gathered files on his desk. Standing next to Diane, she pointed to each file with her finger. General, what we have here goes beyond just you, ma'am. It's a pattern. 17 cases closed in 5 years, all involving black citizens. In at least 8 of them, Sergeant Kyle Brennan's name appears in the complaints. Diane stared intently at the stacked photos and reports, her gaze fixed on the image. Each folder represented a forgotten story, a suppressed injustice. There's more, Malcolm continued. The police union has been funding the defense of officers accused of abuse with public money. It's a protection racket disguised as a legal fund. Can you prove it? Not quite yet, but we're close, and I've already been threatened by lawyers connected to the union itself. Diane leaned back in her chair without hesitation. Then let them sue. The truth doesn't need permission to be told. Days later, the investigation revealed something even more serious. The same law firms involved with the Police Defense Fund were also working on cases in other states, all connected to a national network protecting corrupt police officers. As the legal battle intensified, so did the personal cost. Deputy Ashley Morrison was isolated within the department, removed from her street duties, confined to administrative tasks, receiving scornful glances from those she once called colleagues. Twice a week I would find dead animals left on my doorstep. Her brother Ryan insisted she leave town, but Ashley refused. They want to see me give up, and I'm not going to give them that satisfaction. Working secretly with journalists and investigators, she provided evidence that reinforced Diane's version of events, recordings, reports, internal communications. When a reporter from the National Broadcasting Network, NBN, interviewed her, Ashley spoke in a firm voice. I became a police officer to protect people, but I realize that many here only want to protect their own power, and I can't keep pretending that this is normal. The testimony resonated throughout the country, but it also sealed his fate. His mother cried every day, begging him to give up the uniform. His brother slept with a gun, fearing retaliation. Even so, Ashley felt something she had never felt before, a sense of purpose, because for the first time she was serving the law, not the system but justice, a cause worth fighting for. That's how Diane Whitmore described what was to come. But no one imagined how much this cause would cost. The entire country was shaken by the news. Deputy Travis Holden, Sergeant Kyle Brennan's partner in the fateful arrest, had been found dead in his apartment in Clearwater Springs. The preliminary report spoke of suicide, depression due to media pressure, the report stated. But Major Ethan Cross, upon analyzing classified data from Department of Defense employees, noticed something profoundly wrong. General Caldwell, he reported, this is no coincidence. Holden was to testify at an internal hearing about the Whitmore case. He died 3 days before giving his testimony. And that suicide note? Written in haste, with no resemblance to his original handwriting. Are you suggesting murder, Major? The general asked, tense. I'm saying we can't rule out that possibility. He was nervous. He told his wife he was being followed. Now he's dead, and the only potentially cooperative witness has disappeared. When she learned of her colleague's death, Deputy Ashley Morrison felt a chill down her spine. He remembered the day he had seen him at the police station, dejected, trembling, unable to hold his gaze. He had tried to get closer, seemed to want to confess something, but backed down at the last moment. Now, Ashley wondered if Deputy Holden had found too much courage and paid the price for it. The news reached Diane Whitmore as she prepared for the most important meeting since the beginning of the entire crisis, a personal meeting with Secretary of Defense William Bradford in Washington, D.C. The timing of the news felt like a veiled threat: cooperate with the system or end up like it. But instead of shaking her resolve, it only strengthened it. She thought of the young soldiers she had led on risky missions, people who entrusted her not only with their lives, but also with their sense of duty. Men and women who died believing that justice and freedom were worth the sacrifice. If they had given their lives, she could give her career. The meeting with Bradford took place in a discreet office at the Department of Defense, away from cameras and institutional staging. The secretary, a respected veteran, greeted her with a weary expression. "Diane, I've known you for 15 years, he began informally. You're one of the most competent officers I've ever served with. That's why all of this weighs heavily on me. Sir, I understand the pressures you are facing. Do you really understand? Because there are people in Congress who want your head on a platter. They see you as a symbol of what they fear most, military personnel who think for themselves and don't keep quiet." Diane stared directly at him. "And you? How do you see me?" The secretary remained silent, his eyes fixed on the Washington skyline, the reflection of the Capitol shimmering in the glass. "I see a woman placed in an impossible position, but also someone who needs to choose how this story ends. What kind of choice is that? Retire early with full honors, avoid controversy, go out on top, or keep fighting, and maybe destroy everything you've built," Diane pondered. "It would be easy to accept the exit. A comfortable retirement, occasional lectures, a clean record in the books." But she thought of Ashley Morrison, isolated and threatened for having told the truth. He thought of Marcus Green, the boy who recorded the video that triggered everything. He thought of every citizen who never had a voice, every injustice swept under the rug. "So with all due respect, my career is not what's at stake. It's the country." The secretary nodded slowly. "May God protect us, General, because the storm is only beginning." That same afternoon, Diane Whitmore left the Department of Defense building with a sealed envelope in her hands. Inside were the classified reports that Major Ethan Cross had compiled, and what she read would change everything. The documents revealed a network of corruption and influence that extended far beyond the Clearwater Springs Police Department. One name appeared repeatedly in the spreadsheets, transfers, and intercepted communications. Senator Douglas Mercer, chairman of the Public Safety Committee and a powerful figure in the armed forces budgets. He directly and indirectly funded Patriot Guard 88, the extremist group linked to Kyle Brennan. Diane Whitmore's arrest was no accident. It was the first move in a much larger plan, a game of power, racism, and manipulation played not in the streets, but in the most influential corridors of Washington. And now, for the first time, Diane knew exactly who her enemies were. After meeting with Secretary William Bradford, Diane Whitmore knew she needed allies, people outside the military structure capable of seeing what was really at stake. The sealed envelope, delivered by Major Ethan Cross, led her to an unlikely contact, Eleanor Hayes, a former senior CIA analyst, now retired, but still respected in intelligence circles. At 72, she lived discreetly in a house in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., surrounded by plants and secrets. They met in a modest coffee shop, the kind of place where conversations get lost amidst the clinking of cutlery and the sizzle of espresso. Eleanor arrived first, with her hair in a low bun and large glasses, looking like just another quiet lady reading the newspaper. "General Whitmore," he said bluntly when Diane sat down, "I have been following your case with great interest. Major Cross mentioned that you could help me understand the broader context," Diane replied. The old woman's eyes, firm and analytical, revealed a past of someone who had dealt with covert operations and the downfall of governments. "My dear, what happened to you in Tennessee wasn't a police error. It was a field test." Diane frowned. "A test of what?" "From a network that has been built over years. Senator Douglas Mercer is not just a corrupt politician. He is the civilian face of a project to privatize and militarize the public security system." Eleanor opened a worn leather briefcase and spread documents across the table. Bank statements, intercepted messages, and connection diagrams. At the center of it all is the name of the company Sentinel Security Solutions, linked to Sergeant Kyle Brennan and the extremist group Patriot Guard 88. They are buying influence in police corporations, offering training, equipment, and something called cultural consulting. Diane flipped through the pages. Cultural consulting? Training to identify and neutralize threats to traditional values. In practice, prominent minorities, independently thinking officers, and community leaders who denounce abuses. They are building an ideological army within local police forces. Diane took a deep breath. "And Senator Mercer is the one funding this." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "He diverts funds from the Public Safety Commission and directs multi-million-dollar contracts to cities and states that accept Sentinel as a tactical partner. It's a disguised federalization, a parallel apparatus of control without any democratic oversight." The penny dropped brutally. Diane Whitmore's arrest wasn't just racism. It was a simulation, a real test of power, of how far the network could go without being stopped. "And the plan doesn't end there," Eleanor continued, her voice low. "They want to expand into border security and even intelligence, a state within a state, private and armed." Diane's encrypted cell phone vibrated on the table. A brief message: "Check your secure channel, Falcon." Hours later, in a safe house set up by Ethan Cross outside Washington, Diane accessed the National Intelligence Network's communications terminal. Falcon's files were there, Audio recordings, spreadsheets of illegal donations, intercepted emails, all pointing directly to Senator Mercer. But what really chilled Diane's mind was a recorded conversation between the senator and a man identified only as the General. Mercer, she's very exposed right now, but there are ways to resolve this. Discredit her record, plant evidence, or cause an accident if necessary. The General, leave the military part to me. She has enemies in the department, people who would love to see her fall. Diane recognized something in the voice, a disturbing familiarity, impossible to ignore. A shiver ran down his spine. Meanwhile, in Nashville, Dr. Malcolm Pierce was making progress on his own investigation. General, he said via video conference, what we're seeing is a protection and corruption scheme so well structured that it makes the mafia look amateurish. The same companies and law firms that defended police officers accused of abuse in Tennessee also appeared in California, Texas, and Arizona. It's a national shield system, Malcolm concluded, and you were the first public target of an operation that seeks to turn justice into a business. Diane remained silent for a moment, staring at the screen. Outside, the Washington night was reflected in the window pane like a black mirror. She knew at that moment that the struggle had changed scale. It was no longer a war for honor or reputation. It was about controlling the truth and about the future of the country. The federal case was moving quickly. Among the defendants were Chief of Police Sharon Garrett, Senator Douglas Mercer, and 2 Tennessee state representatives who had received contributions from Sentinel Security Solutions. They are fighting back with everything they've got, warned Dr. Malcolm Pierce in a video conference. I've received death threats, my office has been broken into twice, and someone tried to hack our systems. They won't go down without a fight. Pressure was mounting on all fronts. Sharon Garrett, feeling the net closing in, attempted one last survival move. Through intermediaries, she sent a proposal to Diane Whitmore, a financial settlement and a partial confession in exchange for dropping the investigation. Diane's response was short and unwavering. Chief Garrett, the era of deals is over. The American people deserve the truth. The rejection drove Sharon to desperate measures. She activated old contacts in public security and launched an underground campaign to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. But in her haste, she made a fatal mistake. That week, Eleanor Hayes was working late in her office, cross-referencing bank data that confirmed the direct link between Mercer and the network known as the Shadow Network, the political arm of Sentinel. The following morning, the neighbor found her dead in the armchair, with the coffee cup still on the table. The preliminary report stated natural cardiac arrest, but the last dossier sent by Falcon told a different story. Eleanor's pacemaker had been hacked and sabotaged remotely. They killed her, Diane said quietly, watching the pulse graphs projected on the screen. A 72-year-old woman who only wanted to expose the truth. And they'll do the same to us if they can, replied Major Ethan Cross grimly. The message was clear. Anyone who challenged the network would pay with their life, regardless of age, position, or service history. Even under threat, Diane Whitmore decided to use the visibility she had gained. She was invited to give a speech at the graduation ceremony of the West Point Military Academy, before the new generation of American officers. Standing on the podium with the national flag waving in the background, she looked at hundreds of uniformed young people and remembered her own ceremony decades ago, when everything seemed simple: to serve and protect. "Cadets," he began, his voice firm, "today you swear to defend the Constitution of the United States. This oath has no exceptions. It bends neither to political expediency nor to fear." The silence was absolute. She went on to talk about institutional decay, loyalty to principles rather than to people, and the courage needed to confront power when it becomes corrupt. True patriotism is not blind obedience to authority, she said. It is the courage to hold that authority accountable for the values it claims to represent. There will be times when doing the right thing will cost more than doing the easy thing. Remember, your oath is to the United States, not to individuals, parties, or institutions. The speech was broadcast on national television. Within minutes, the video went viral, a manifesto of honor that resonated with civilians, the military, and social movements. But it also turned Diane into a real threat to those who preferred obedient soldiers and convenient silence. Meanwhile, Sergeant Kyle Brennan, on the run since the death of Deputy Travis Holden, was trying to disappear. He eventually turned up in rural Kentucky, where a group of local militiamen recognized him at a gas station. "You're the cop who confronted that stuck-up general, aren't you?" one of them mocked, surrounding him. Brennan tried to portray himself as a victim, saying he was fleeing political injustices and corrupt investigators. But it only took the group a few minutes to realize that they were dealing with a coward, not a martyr. "We thought you were a patriot," their leader said disdainfully, "but you're just another man who runs away when he has to face his own actions." One of the militiamen recorded Brennan's breakdown, crying and begging for protection, and posted the video on social media. Within hours, the former police officer became a symbol of the moral failure of the system he had sworn to protect. Meanwhile, in Washington, Amber Whitmore, Diane's niece, was gaining national prominence. Her internship on the Congressional Civil Rights Committee had placed her directly at the center of the legislative response to her aunt's case. With over 2 million followers, his posts about justice, equality, and the role of the military in democracy were shaping public debate. "My aunt was humiliated for representing what many try to erase: dignity, merit, and conscience," Amber wrote in a post that surpassed 10 million views. Suddenly, one woman's struggle had become the movement of an entire country, and the name Diane Whitmore was no longer just that of a wronged general, it was that of a nation awakening. Amber Whitmore had become more than just a voice on social media. She was the new face of civic resistance in the country. Young people from all states organized demonstrations, campaigns, and petitions, demanding punishment for those responsible for the network that had destroyed the reputation and threatened the life of their aunt, Diane Whitmore. "Justice is not something you wait for," Amber wrote on her profile, alongside a photo in front of the Capitol. "It's something we fight for every day." Her activism, however, also made her a target. The attack in Washington happened without any warning. 3 masked men tried to grab her as she was leaving the building where she was interning at the Civil Rights Commission. They could have succeeded if it weren't for the quick intervention of Lieutenant Caroline Spencer of the Capitol Police, who recognized her from the news reports and reacted. "Get down!" Caroline shouted, drawing her weapon and forcing the attackers to flee. The episode made national headlines, turning Amber into a symbol of youth who refused to be silenced in the face of power. But the final revelation of the story came unexpectedly, through a hacked video that informant Falcon managed to intercept and release. The images, obtained from a secret meeting at a private ranch in rural Kentucky, showed Senator Douglas Mercer, Chief Sharon Garrett, and a third man in an olive-green uniform, his face partially obscured, whose voice Diane instantly recognized. "Mercer, the situation with Whitmore has gotten out of control. We need to neutralize it before it destroys everything." Man, deep voice. "I'll take care of the military part." It was the voice of General Vincent Hayes, Diane's former mentor and commander. Hayes, "There are ways to discredit her record, plant evidence of misconduct, make her seem resentful, and if that's not enough..." Garrett, "What if she resists?" Hayes, "Then we moved on to more permanent solutions. Accidents happen all the time in the armed forces. The video went viral on social media and television. Public outrage reached historic levels. An entire country watched, horrified, as high-ranking officials and politicians casually conspired to assassinate a decorated general who had dedicated nearly 30 years to the nation. The leak changed everything. At the Department of Defense, General Richard Caldwell, the highest-ranking active officer, convened a confidential task force. In a room protected by soundproofing, he gathered a small group of officers and legal experts. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are facing a cancer within our own ranks. General Vincent Hayes violated his oath, betrayed his country, and conspired to eliminate a fellow officer. We will eradicate this cancer." Among those present were Colonel Samantha Porter from Military Intelligence, Major Derek Walsh from the Legal Department, and Captain Melissa Chen from the Internal Affairs Department. Each one brought their own specialty: surveillance, evidence analysis, or military law. "General, Hayes still has allies here," Samantha warned. "There are officers who see this as political persecution." "Then we will act cautiously but firmly," Caldwell replied. "We have the evidence. Now we need to ensure that it leads to justice." The task force placed Vincent Hayes under surveillance while cross-referencing confidential data. They discovered that he had used his patent to access restricted files on Diane, including travel information and medical history, which he passed on to Mercer's team and to Sentinel. Meanwhile, the identity of the mysterious Falcon finally came to light. His real name, Nathan Falcon Rivera, a former NSA analyst who became a whistleblower after witnessing corruption rampant within the system itself. In a confidentially recorded deposition, Rivera explained his motivation. "I became Falcon because I could no longer stand by silently while institutions were taken over by those who see power as an end in itself, not as a responsibility." What happened to General Whitmore was just the beginning. The data he provided completed the puzzle. Sentinel's money, public contracts, Douglas Mercer's bought votes, and Vincent Hayes's armed wing, all connected in a power network that aimed to dominate the national security system. Meanwhile, Dr. Malcolm Pierce was preparing the final blow. A federal lawsuit of unprecedented proportions, denouncing not only the direct culprits, but the entire system that supported them. In a live-streamed press conference, he stated, "We are not seeking justice only for Diane Whitmore. We are seeking to dismantle a criminal conspiracy that threatens the constitutional rights of every American citizen." At that moment, the country understood. The story of a woman handcuffed on a Tennessee highway had transformed into a battle for the soul of the United States. The federal process had grown to encompass financial institutions, construction companies, and politicians. Banks had laundered millions through phantom contracts with Sentinel security solutions. Construction companies supplied equipment and training used in attacks on civilians. And members of Congress manipulated public funds to protect criminal activities disguised as national security. But the net wouldn't fall without a fight. General Vincent Hayes, realizing his position was hanging by a thread, began destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses. He used his access authorization to the Department of Defense to hack into the personal files of officers and police who could testify against him, attempting to silence them through threats and blackmail. His desperation led him to a direct confrontation with Major Ethan Cross, a member of the task force led by General Richard Caldwell. They met by chance, or perhaps not, in an underground parking garage on the outskirts of Washington. "Hayes, you owe your life to Diane Whitmore, but you owe your career to me. I was the one who protected you, who promoted you, who kept you alive." Cross: "With all due respect, sir, my loyalty is to the oath I swore, not to men. General Whitmore saved my life because it was the right thing to do, and I will do the right thing for her." Hayes's mask of authority crumbled, revealing panic. Hayes, you have no idea what you're up against. This goes far beyond what you can imagine. Cross, then it's a price I'm willing to pay. What Hayes didn't know was that FBI agents, in cooperation with the NSA, were recording the entire conversation. His attempt at intimidation turned into further proof of obstruction of justice and abuse of power. Meanwhile, Chief Sharon Garrett, caught between the FBI and her former allies, attempted to escape. Using forged documents and contacts from Sentinel, he planned to flee the country via Mexico, where he would assume a new identity and manage offshore bank accounts. But the Department of Justice, which had been monitoring her movements since the video leaked, arrested her at the border. Inside the car, they found a fake passport and a complete escape plan with dates, contacts, and even the false name she would use, Sarah Mitchell, a Canadian citizen. His capture broke the last protective link in the network. Without Sharon's technical expertise and Hayes' military clout, Senator Douglas Mercer was left exposed. The federal grand jury requested by Dr. Malcolm Pierce was finally approved, and official subpoenas began to be sent to banks, construction companies, and government departments. The empire of impunity that seemed untouchable was collapsing before the entire country's eyes. In Clearwater Springs, Deputy Ashley Morrison, who had risked everything to expose the truth, was recognized and exonerated. During a hearing of the Congressional Civil Rights Committee, Kyle Brennan's original audio recordings were played on national television. In them, the police officer boasted about teaching a lesson to a female officer who stuck up to her boss. When the tapes played, the plenary session fell silent. "I became a police officer to protect and serve the community," Ashley declared live on camera. "But I found myself surrounded by people more interested in protecting their own power than the law. That's not justice, it's corruption in uniform." His speech moved the country. From an anonymous police officer, Ashley became a national symbol of courage and integrity. Following his testimony, hundreds of agents across the United States began to denounce abuses and internal schemes inspired by his stance. Meanwhile, the hunt for Sergeant Kyle Brennan was drawing to a close. He was located by the FBI in a trailer park outside Phoenix, Arizona, alone, disfigured by fear and abandonment. The network had discarded him like dead weight. In exchange for partial immunity and protection, Brennan agreed to expose the entire operation. During questioning conducted by Ethan Cross and federal prosecutors, he confessed, "They said we were patriots, that we were protecting America from those who wanted to destroy our values. But we were just uniformed thugs doing the dirty work of cowards in suits and mandates." Their testimonies provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Phone records, bank transfers, and recordings showed Douglas Mercer coordinating the network and using Sentinel to fund attacks and manipulate investigations. The decisive proof came when Nathan Falcon Rivera granted full access to the encrypted servers that the network used to communicate. Inside them, investigators found years of messages, reports, and operational plans. Every contract, every deposit, every order. The conspiracy was fully documented, and for the first time the truth was in the right hands. The country that had watched the beginning of this story with disbelief was now witnessing in real time the fall of an invisible empire. And in the cold, unspoken lines of the FBI reports, it was written what everyone knew, but few dared to say. Justice may take time, but when it arrives, it doesn't ask permission. Among the most devastating pieces of evidence uncovered by the task force was an intercepted conversation between Senator Douglas Mercer and General Vincent Hayes, discussing plans to expand their surveillance program. They wanted to silence journalists, civil rights lawyers, activists, and military officials who had spoken out against corruption. Diane Whitmore was just the beginning, Mercer's raspy voice said in one of the recordings. We need to make it clear that no one is safe if they challenge us. Not generals, not reporters, not politicians. Fear is our most effective weapon. The recording was shown at a closed-door Senate hearing, of which Mercer himself was a member. The silence that followed the end of the audio was deafening. The senators, stunned, listened as one of their peers openly discussed the physical elimination of American citizens, a scene that would be etched in the country's political history. But the most shocking revelation would come soon after. Decrypted files showed that the network also planned to attack Amber Whitmore, the general's young niece, whose digital activism had become a symbol of resistance. They were going to plant drugs in her dorm room at the university, Major Ethan Cross reported to Diane during a secret meeting at the Department of Defense. They would make it seem like she was using her influence to cover up crimes. And if that didn't work... He stopped. Diane understood without needing to hear the rest. The documents detailed grim contingency plans, including scenarios of the simultaneous execution of aunt and niece presented as accidents. The discovery was the final blow. The network's desperate attempts to destroy evidence only increased the accusations of obstruction of justice. FBI teams conducted operations in 5 states, raiding offices, seizing servers, and arresting dozens of people involved. What began as an abusive raid in Clearwater Springs had turned into a war against an empire of corruption and fear. They hadn't chosen Diane simply because she was a woman or black, but because she represented everything the corrupt system feared: integrity, competence, and moral courage. But in trying to destroy it, the network self-destructed. And now, the full weight of American justice rested upon them. The streets of Nashville were packed. News trucks lined up for blocks, drones flew over the federal courthouse, and thousands of protesters, from veterans to students, gathered with signs demanding justice for Diane Whitmore. The trial of the century had begun. In the dock, Senator Douglas Mercer, Chief Sharon Garrett, and General Vincent Hayes. The Department of Justice had appointed Special Federal Prosecutor Jennifer Coleman, a former military judge known for her integrity and firmness. His first sentence when addressing the jury echoed through the TV cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not just about corruption. It's about the criminal abuse of power. It's about broken oaths and what happens when those who should protect the people choose to oppress them." Alongside her, Dr. Malcolm Pierce, now acting as special prosecutor, presented a devastating dossier. Each spreadsheet, each transfer, each recorded conversation traced a complete map of the conspiracy, uniting businessmen, military personnel, and politicians in a network that attempted to manipulate democracy itself. On the 3rd day of hearings, the court fell silent when Diane Whitmore was called to testify. She appeared in uniform, the dark blue dress uniform, medals on her chest, erect posture, serene gaze. The reflection of the courtroom lights sparkled on the decorations that commemorated 27 years of service. When he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, the entire country seemed to hold its breath. Prosecutor Coleman: "General Whitmore, tell the court about your career path." Diane: "I joined the army at 22. I served in peacekeeping missions in Haiti and the Middle East. I commanded troops in conflict zones. I saw the best and the worst of humanity. I've always believed that a soldier's duty is to defend the Constitution against external enemies and, if necessary, against internal ones as well." She then described the night it all began. "It was May 15th. I was returning from picking up my niece's graduation dress in Clearwater Springs. I was stopped by officers Kyle Brennan and Travis Holden. I showed them my ID, explained who I was, but they laughed. They said it didn't matter who I was, that in that town we were all equal, and that I would learn what that meant." Malcolm Pierce: "Did the lady resist arrest, General?" Diane: "No. I remained calm, as I've learned to be. I cooperated the whole time, even when they handcuffed me and mocked my uniform. The silence in the courtroom was total. Cameras captured discreet tears in the audience. At that moment, the woman they tried to silence raised her own voice before the entire country, and the United States listened. The trial had barely begun, but everyone already knew this would not be just a sentence, it would be a historic milestone. The day a nation looked at its mistakes and decided that the truth cannot be silenced, not even under shackles. I thought of all the young soldiers I've led over the years, boys and girls who entrusted me with their lives, their fears, and their dreams. I thought about what it would mean for them if I allowed this injustice to go unpunished. I thought about the oath I swore before the flag and what it truly means to defend the Constitution. The fight, I realized, isn't always on the battlefield. Sometimes it begins inside a courtroom. During questioning, defense attorneys attempted to unsettle her, insinuating that Diane Whitmore had used the racial issue as a political tool and that it was all just media theatrics. But his composure was steely. "Doctor," said Diane, looking at Senator Douglas Mercer's lawyer, "I've spent my life in places where one wrong argument could cost me my life. I learned early on that the truth is the only weapon that matters." The most electrifying moment came when Nathan Falcon Rivera, a former NSA analyst, was called to testify. The entire hall leaned forward. "Mr. Rivera," asked Prosecutor Jennifer Coleman, "how long have you been monitoring the defendant's communications?" 3 years, he replied calmly. "I realized that surveillance requests were being redirected to activists, journalists, and military personnel who questioned corruption. It was a clear pattern." Falcon described how the network used official state resources to track Diane, intercept calls from her family, monitor Amber Whitmore, and plan the police approach that would humiliate her. The evidence included encrypted reports, videos, and execution orders digitally signed by authorities. "Did you find any evidence that General Whitmore's arrest was planned in advance?" Jennifer asked. "Yes," Nathan replied. "There are conversations between Mercer and Hayes explicitly discussing the ideal moment to expose and neutralize the general. They considered her too dangerous because of her influence within the armed forces. The defense tried to discredit him, calling him a resentful employee, but his composure and meticulous documentation silenced the court. Next, Deputy Ashley Morrison gave the most moving testimony of the trial. His voice trembled as he recalled the days when he believed the uniform represented justice. "I became a police officer to protect people, not to terrorize them." She recounted the nights of fear, the burning cross planted in her garden, the anonymous threats, and the isolation at work. But he also spoke about the strength that arises when someone chooses to do the right thing, even alone. "I realized that what happened to General Whitmore wasn't a mistake. It was part of a system that persecutes those who don't fit the mold of power, women, black people, and anyone who dares to remind us that authority is not impunity." The last witness was Sergeant Kyle Brennan himself, now a broken man, sitting before the cameras, his gaze vacant. Malcolm Pierce. "Did you choose General Whitmore as a target because of her color?" Brennan. "Yes. They said she was arrogant, that she needed to be put in her place. Those were Chief Sharon Garrett's exact words, and everyone knew the orders came from above." Brennan's testimony completed the chain of evidence. He confessed to planting false evidence, destroying recordings, and participating in meetings where the idea of setting an example was discussed. With each sentence, the weight of truth crushed any attempt at defense. The defendant's lawyers resorted to predictable excuses. Hayes cited patriotism as the reason. Sharon Garrett's representative said she was following orders from her superiors. And Mercer's team tried to portray the case as political persecution, saying he was a conservative voice silenced by the media. But the evidence was irrefutable. Bank records showed money flowing from contractors linked to Sentinel security solutions directly into political campaigns and personal accounts. Phone intercepts revealed conversations between Mercer and Hayes about selective neutralizations. And videos recorded by the defendants themselves showed the trio discussing strategies for public manipulation. During closing arguments, Dr. Malcolm Pierce stood before the jury, the weight of history on his shoulders. "Members of the jury," he began, "the defendants want you to believe that this case is about politics, about left and right, about military and civilians. But it's not. It's about right and wrong. It's about the line between authority and abuse." He then pointed to Diane, who was sitting in the back between Janet, his sister, and Amber, his niece. This woman served the United States for 27 years. She never asked for privilege. She only asked for the same right as any citizen, to drive peacefully through her city without being humiliated because of the color of her skin. The court remained silent. Outside, on the marble steps, crowds awaited the verdict, holding signs that read, "The truth will not be silenced." At that moment, the country understood that the Diane Whitmore case wasn't just about a general handcuffed in Clearwater Springs. It was about an entire America waking up to demand that justice and dignity never again be the exception. The jury deliberated for 8 full hours. When they returned to the room, the jury foreman was carrying a stack of documents that would decide the fate of some of the most powerful figures in the United States. "On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights," he announced in a firm voice, "we find the defendant, Senator Douglas Mercer, guilty." The hall erupted in restrained applause, followed by tears and silent embraces. One by one, the verdicts were read. Sharon Garrett, Vincent Hayes, and Douglas Mercer, guilty of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. General Hayes also received an additional conviction for violating his military oath and misusing classified information. From where she was seated, Diane Whitmore maintained her composure until the end. When the judge announced the final sentence, tears welled up in his eyes, not of pain, but of relief and liberation. Justice had prevailed, not only for her, but for all the victims of the system that tried to silence her. 6 months later, Diane was at the White House, invited by President Charles Bennett to witness a historic moment, the signing of the Whitmore-Morrison Act, a national milestone in police reform and public transparency. The legislation mandated mandatory body cameras, anti-extremism assessments, whistleblower protection, and federal oversight of departments involved in abuses. "What happened to General Whitmore can never happen again," President Bennett declared to the press. "This law is a commitment to equality and to the supreme value of justice." Behind him, Diane, in her navy blue uniform, stood firm. This would be her last official appearance before retirement. 3 weeks later, Arlington National Cemetery hosted an unprecedented ceremony. Hundreds of officers, cadets, and civilians gathered to honor the woman who confronted power and won. During the ceremony, Diane was posthumously promoted to Lieutenant General, and General Richard Caldwell delivered a speech. General Diane Whitmore reminded us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to do what is right, even when fear screams loudest. The event also honored those who paid the highest price for the truth. Eleanor Hayes, Deputy Travis Holden, and so many others whose names were now engraved in marble. Deputy Ashley Morrison, redeemed and recognized, had found a new purpose. She was appointed President of the National Council on Police Ethics and Transparency, created by the Whitmore-Morrison Act itself. In her inauguration speech, she said before hundreds of police officers and journalists, "I learned that silence in the face of injustice is a form of complicity. Even if our voices tremble, we have a duty to speak." Under his leadership, the council created new training programs, ethical selection criteria, and internal oversight mechanisms that began to change police culture across the country. Real-life stories of courage, like Ashley's, have been included in official FBI training, teaching that true loyalty is to the law, not to a corrupt colleague. Dr. Malcolm Pierce, in turn, saw his career reach a new level. He received a presidential honorary mention and founded the Hayes and Holden Foundation, which provides legal assistance to whistleblowers and victims of institutional abuse. Named in honor of Eleanor Hayes and Deputy Travis Holden, the foundation handled hundreds of cases in its first year. During the foundation's inaugural dinner, Malcolm declared, "The law is only as strong as the people willing to defend it. If we remain silent when it is tested, then we cease to be a nation. We become merely a piece of paper with empty promises." Lieutenant Colonel Ethan Cross, now heading an internal intelligence unit at the Department of Defense, has dedicated himself to identifying and neutralizing extremist networks within institutions. His experience in Kentucky had taught him about the value of life, but it was the Whitmore case that taught him the value of principles. Thanks to his work, the United States developed a transparent and constitutional intelligence model, which was copied by other countries. But the ending wouldn't be complete without a touch of mystery. Nathan Falcon Rivera, the informant who exposed the shadow network, disappeared after the trial. His immunity agreement protected him legally, but not from revenge. Rumors said he had been seen crossing the northern border under another identity. Others believed that the state had hidden him for his safety. Be that as it may, one thing was certain: thanks to him, the truth came to light. And the country learned that the courage of one person can illuminate the silence of an entire nation. One morning, Lieutenant Colonel Ethan Cross found an old postcard on his desk. On it, a handwritten phrase, "Freedom is not found in the light, but guarded in the shadows." The stamp was from some Eastern European country, but Ethan knew the message came from someone much closer: Nathan Falcon Rivera. Somewhere, hidden under another name, the man who exposed the network continued to observe the world in the shadows, alert to new threats to the democracy he had helped to preserve. Meanwhile, Amber Whitmore had found her purpose in echoing her aunt's struggle. Her book, My Aunt the General, became a national bestseller, recounting how one family's suffering uncovered a conspiracy that shook the nation. But, more important than her literary success, she used her voice to found the New Generation for Justice Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to training young leaders in constitutional law, peaceful resistance, and ethical activism. His lectures toured schools and universities across the United States, inspiring thousands of young people to fight for democracy. "Justice is not something that happens to you," she told the audience. "It's something you build with courage and daily choices." At age 19, she was invited to speak at the UN General Assembly before delegates from all over the world. She spoke about the power of individual courage to bring about collective change and received a standing ovation. In Clearwater Springs, the police department was officially dissolved. Its officers were dismissed or transferred, and the building was demolished. In its place, the Civil Rights Memorial Park was created, a space for remembrance and learning. Engraved on the black granite walls were the names of the victims of corruption and those who had the courage to denounce it. In the center, a sculpture of golden scales displayed the inscription, "Justice delayed is justice denied, but when done, it lights the way." The park has become a point of civic pilgrimage. Schools took students to hear stories of courage and understand the value of public accountability. Entire families visited the place in silence, some crying, others simply giving thanks. 2 years after the trial, Diane Whitmore walked alone to Arlington National Cemetery. He carried with him his Medal of the National Order of Military Merit. He knelt before Deputy Travis Holden's simple gravestone, placed the medal on the marble, and murmured, "You tried to do the right thing, and now the entire United States knows it." Holden's widow, who had suffered years of shame and silence, now found solace. Her grief finally had meaning. The repercussions of the Whitmore case continued to spread. Police departments across the country have implemented new policies, mandatory body cameras, and ethics training. Companies and politicians linked to corrupt security schemes have been removed from their positions, and a new generation of Americans grew up believing that democracy is not guaranteed. It is earned every day. The final scene of this story doesn't take place in a courtroom, but in a public school auditorium in Atlanta. Diane, now retired, had been invited to speak before students and teachers. When he entered the stage, the audience rose to their feet and gave him a standing ovation. She waited for the sound to subside, raised her hand, and said, in the firm voice that once commanded battalions, "Don't applaud me, march for what is right." The silence lasted a second, and then came a new round of applause, not of celebration, but of understanding. It was the sound of people inspired to act, aware that the fight for justice never ends, it only passes from one generation to another. As she left the stage, Diane Whitmore knew her mission was accomplished. She had served the United States in war and peace, in uniform and as a civilian. He faced foreign and internal enemies, and won not with weapons, but with integrity and courage. The police approach that had tried to silence her had, ironically, amplified her voice. The network that sought to destroy her ended up being destroyed by the very truth she defended, and the principles he swore to protect, liberty, justice, and equality, emerged from the ordeal stronger than ever. The camera pulled back from the stage, while hundreds of voices joined in a chorus that echoed through the auditorium and the streets outside. Justice, justice, justice. And in that instant, the United States seemed a little more just, a little more truthful, because a woman refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. And now, a question remains for the viewers. What would you do if the system to which you dedicated your life turned against you? Would you have the courage to fight, even if it cost you everything? Like and subscribe to learn more stories of people who, like Diane Whitmore, refused to remain silent in the face of power.